I think a lot of the rhetoric is often around, taking jobs or something like that. And what's often missed is how much they actually contribute to the economy, right? So in terms of investment, in terms of innovation, in terms of entrepreneurship, there's so many dimensions on which they're playing a really positive role in the economy that just doesn't get talked about in the news.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. The topic of immigration is one that is on the minds of many people here in the United States right now, but it is also a very important economic topic as well. Pleased to be joined here in studio by Britta Glennon of the Wharton School, who has researched this topic in the past. She joins us here in studio. Britta is an assistant professor of management here at the school.
It's so nice to be here.
So you have done research rather recently about how immigration and firms kind of connect. Take us through a little bit of what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, I really wanted to emphasize the importance of the role of the firm in immigration. So for example, if we're thinking about visas, so I focus on skilled immigration. Skilled immigration visas are almost entirely sponsored by firms. So firms are actually the ones who select the individuals who get the visas. They do that entire process, right? They're the ones who apply, and they're the ones who actually that immigrant is then tied to for the length of their visa, right? So just from that perspective, they're playing a really important role. But there's also other ways in which the firm really matters, right? So immigrants, they are 80% more likely than natives to start firms, for example, right? And so it's not just the case that they are, coming in and, taking jobs or something like that. They're actually creating jobs through creating new startups. They also actually attract a lot of investment, FDI, right? So when you have an influx of immigrants, what often follows is companies from their home country, from their country of origin, will actually follow. And so they'll start setting up their own subsidiaries there. And that, of course, also creates jobs, right? And, they also, when immigrants join firms, you can see sort of within firms, there's this complementary relationship with Americans where when they come together, they're actually more innovative, right? And so you get more patents as well, more innovation when immigrants and natives are coming together. And that makes the firms that hire them actually perform a lot better, become more innovative, et cetera, right? So there's all these different ways in which firms and immigrants are interacting that are really positive for the economy.
I found it interesting that one of the areas you touch on is not only the impact that you will see, just say here in the United States with immigrants coming over here on a visa, but there's a corollary impact that occurs in that person's home country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this kind of goes back to, some of this goes back to the investment piece, right? So if, for example, there is a community of Swedish immigrants, right? Then there's going to be an increase in Swedish companies investing in that area. So that's been well documented in the research. But also, it goes the other way as well, that if a company in the U.S. hires immigrants from a particular country, so say a particular company hires a number of Indian immigrants, they're actually going to perform better in India, and they're going to be more likely to expand and invest in India. So that's actually one of the ways that they really help firms, because they know a lot about, for example, how India government contracts work, perhaps, or they know about Indian consumer tastes or things like that, right? And so there's this really strong positive relationship between hiring immigrants and the firm's performance in that home country for those reasons.
There is also the component of when you have students come over to the United States to get their education, and then what they do with their careers afterwards as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you think about H-1B visas, that's probably the best known skilled immigration visa. firms are often hiring students, right, with those H-1B visas to come and work with them afterwards. And what they're coming with is, a different experience that Americans have, and different kind of ideas, different knowledge, different connections, and that's sort of bringing this new perspective into the firm and bringing new knowledge into the firm. And so that's actually, one of the reasons why there tends to be a boost in innovation, for example,
right,
because innovation is often about the recombination of different ideas. And so, they're bringing that from their home countries, and that's then boosting firm performance and innovation.
You also mentioned in the paper, even there's the business component, but there's also the component that can sometimes be impacted in and around research that would occur with either units in both countries as well.
Yeah, so that too, right? So it's not just kind of within that firm in the U.S. where this could be happening, but also, if you hire immigrants from a particular country, they may still be in contact with people in their home country, and so you might end up with these like cross-border teams producing new research, and so it actually really boosts sort of global science, right? And collaborations across different parts of the world as well.
So right now, one of the concerns that is out there is the kind of the anti-sentiment, and this will happen, by different people against different immigrants who will be coming here to the U.S. In terms of the research that you did, there's a component, I guess, with the Chinese involved, anti-Chinese sentiment factors when you look at how Chinese scientists work here in the U.S.
Yeah. So we found that basically growing hostility towards China, some of that is, policy driven, some of that is sort of a more organic sort of negative sentiment in the U.S. That's really deterred Chinese students from coming to the U.S. So we see that, thousands of STEM PhD students from China have ended up not coming to the U.S. and are instead typically going to other Anglophone countries, actually. So it's not that they're going back to China, it's actually that they're going to Canada or the UK or Australia or New Zealand. And so, we're missing out on a lot of these, top talents from China.
So when you think about the importance of STEM education and how that is going to, advance a lot of components in our economy right now, that's a significant loss that our country would be seeing by not having those individuals here in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to other countries instead, right? So it's not, if you care about something like national competitiveness,
right,
then actually that's even more worrying because other countries are getting that talent instead of us.
I would assume that because the relations between the U.S. and China are not great right now, that relationship has an impact on a lot of these components of potential future development, or at least cuts it off before it even has a chance to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're really capturing only the tip of the iceberg in our paper because we actually stopped our study in 2019, right? Which arguably is before the tensions really escalated. And we're already finding, big effects in terms of fewer Chinese students coming to the U.S., fewer Chinese students staying in the U.S. We're seeing kind of a real productivity hit to ethnically Chinese researchers in the U.S. as well, which obviously is really horrible. Not just a productivity hit, but some dropping out of the workplace altogether. And the U.S.-China scientific relationship arguably has been the most important one in the world for a couple decades now. There's huge amount of collaboration between scientists in both countries. There's huge amounts of Chinese students coming to the U.S. and learning, and that kind of knowledge transfer is really important for innovation, right? That recombination of ideas from different parts of the world. And, as those tensions increase, that circulation of ideas and people is going to continue to decline, and we're going to lose out on what that collaboration was creating.
Is that tension then fairly similar to what you would see? I mean, obviously, we're not at war with China, but obviously there's a significant tension. Yeah. But is it somewhat similar to what you might see if countries were going to war at some point?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what sparked our interest in studying this, is that there's been, some really phenomenal work documenting what happened to science during World War I, for example, when there were real complete cutting off of collaboration between parts of the world.
Right.
And, really big detrimental effects. And we were curious if you would still see that, if it was just kind of these broader tensions. And, they're a little bit less dramatic, right? Because it's not a complete cutoff, but they're still quite significant.
But that component of quote unquote war is probably a little bit different today because of technology and how much you can factor in the component of hacking and attacks via the internet as a way to be able to do harm to your opposition.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talk about that component of STEM. How long have we really been seeing that? And I guess 2016 was a year that we were seeing part of this shift as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we really see in the data the impact of these tensions starting to take off around 2016. And we attribute it to a couple things. This is around when at least some of the arrests of Chinese scientists started to take off. There was one very famous one, Xiaoxing Shi, who's a physicist at Temple here, who was arrested. It turned out he was not guilty on the belief that he was a spy for the Chinese government.
Right.
So that took place, and then you had the Trump campaign, and which very much painted China as the enemy. And so that's sort of when we start to see this negative sentiment against China growing. And then it, of course, gets even more solidified when you have the U.S.-China trade war, and when you have the formal China initiative, which was, the formalized version of arresting Chinese scientists for fear of espionage.
How much of a challenge is it then right now with trying to build out a lot of these components of immigrational relationships between countries, especially in a technological area where, to a degree, in many cases, we're still learning what the impacts truly are in many cases?
Yeah. I mean, I think we certainly can say that what we've found so far is probably a lower bound, right? Because I think it's gotten much tougher since then, right? It's gotten the restrictions have gotten much more tough since then. It's a little bit difficult empirically to tease that out just because you have COVID and you have some other things going on. But at least from preliminary looks at the data, right, these effects are only getting bigger. And, we focus on U.S.-China in this one paper. But, general negative sentiment towards immigrants overall are likely to have some of the similar effects, although we haven't directly studied that.
Right, but the expectation, I was going to ask you the same way, if whether or not you can start to even correlate it towards what we're seeing against immigrants from other countries here in the United States. And I think it's probably a safe assumption to say there probably are some of these elements playing out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen, not my work, but another paper that documented that actually there has been a decline in international students at U.S. universities.
Right.
And actually the types of students who are less likely to come are the highest quality ones because they have other options, right?
Right.
And so we are already starting to see that in our universities.
Off of the research you did for this study, is there a next step that you think is the logical step for the next piece of research to go off of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things. As always, research always spawns a million more questions that you can possibly answer.
Spider webs out for you, right?
Yeah. But one of the things that I think we would really like to look into is, there is things like the China initiative and this fear of espionage. They didn't come out of nowhere, right? There have been, there has been a credible increase in sort of espionage threats from the Chinese government. And so national security is not something that you want to completely brush aside.
Right.
But our feeling is that it's spread much beyond national security. And so we'd really like to be able to tease out, where it's kind of gone beyond that. Right. So teasing it just from a broader welfare perspective, how much of this is, well, maybe it's okay given the benefit of national security, and where like actually this is doing more harm than good.
Britta, great to have you here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Britta Glennon, who's Assistant Professor of Management here at the Wharton School. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.